Imagine a place promised to be a paradise, where there's enough food and resources for everyone, there's equality, love, and most importantly, there's peace and tranquility. Well, in 1984, a group of people led by an American man decided to do exactly that, create a utopia on Earth. But that place had a secret, and what unfolded in this hidden paradise was so horrific that it would lead to the death of more than 900 people. In fact, there is a popular saying that we all say today that actually originated from this event. Before we get started, my name is Raphael. I'm a lawyer by day and a scary storyteller by night. And on this channel, we unravel dark mysteries, we explore true crime, and we delve into the bizarre, the wacky, and the unexplained. So if this piques your curiosity, I want you to summon the like button to the stand so I know that I have your full support. Please also press subscribe and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. So, are you ready? Let's get started. Our story begins with a young boy called Jim Jones. Now, he was born on May 13, 1931 in a small town in Indiana, the United States. And unfortunately, he was born into a set of very challenging circumstances, to say the very least. His father was a disabled World War I veteran who self-medicated the only way he knew how to, which was with alcohol. And subsequently, Jim was sometimes a victim of his father's rage. And his mother, on the other hand, she held very unconventional beliefs, and she had a really strong personality. And she had this fierce conviction that her son was destined for greatness. Now, there wasn't really any evidence at the time that Jim had a unique set of skills or was particularly talented at anything, but his mother was a huge advocate. And she told everyone, including Jim, that he was about to do something really, really special. So because of all this, he had a very tumultuous environment, because on one hand, he was abused by his father and he had a lot of insecurity and self-doubt. But on the other hand, his mother praised him like no other. So he had this sense of superiority. And where did that all lead to? Well, religion and death. As a kid, Jim started holding these mock funerals for animals, and he also invited the neighborhood kids together so that he could preach to them about God and miracles and politics. And as he grew older, in his 20s, Jim began attending gatherings of the United States Communist Party. And initially he thought, this is great. These people have the same values as me, they want the same things, and I could potentially climb up the ladder and become the leader of this party one day. But it turns out it was not a safe place for him at all. He was constantly made fun of, he was bullied, and he suffered a lot of harassment. And he in turn felt the organisation was not doing enough to affect social change, or at least the type of social change that Jim wanted. So he decided to take matters into his own hands. In 1955, he established the People's Temple. Now, this church was founded on the principles of racial harmony and social justice, which at the time was very controversial because that was the era of racial segregation. But Jim wasn't deterred, and people noticed. Jim's rhetoric and actions, such as adopting children from diverse ethnic backgrounds, earned him a reputation as a champion of equality and acceptance. And all in all, Jim was doing a very, very good thing. However, beneath the surface, there was something very evil that only Jim saw. As the years went on, the People's Temple started to grow and get more followers, and it was doing very well. And with all the funds and donations they received, they were able to purchase these grand buildings and convert them into churches. And you would probably think Jim must have been so happy about this. I mean, after all, his dreams were turning into a reality. But he wasn't. You see, Jim was paranoid. He believed the US government and all these other entities were conspiring against him and his followers. And he believed that they were after him. So to escape this perceived prosecution, Jim relocated the church to California, and there he started to build more and more churches. And he also started to get involved in local politics, and he aligned himself with prominent figures and causes, ultimately making a very, very, very big name for himself. But as the years continued to go on, Jim's paranoia grew more and more. In January 1974, his paranoia reached its peak. Walking back and forth in the back room of his Los Angeles church, he started to think very intently. You see, he was a very stoic figure, but inside there was fear. And whilst the political and social climate tolerated his church and practices at that time, they certainly didn't accept them. Nor did it look like his church or his views were ever going to be accepted. Now, we actually don't know whether this was Jim's paranoia or whether he actually faced real and legitimate threats, but we do know that Jim believed that drastic measures needed to take place. And that drastic measure was to not just find a new home for his church, but this time actually fulfill his vision. The vision that he always had, but he could never fulfill until now. And that vision was to create a real-life utopia on Earth. After months of searching, Jim identified a remote location in Guyana, South America, as his ideal site for his utopian society. So he leased land from the government and he began constructing what he called Jonestown, presenting it as a sanctuary from the oppression and corruption of the outside world. For Jim, this isolated commune represented his vision to free the world. And for his followers, this was the promised paradise. Upon their arrival in Guyana, the members of the People's Temple were initially filled with so much hope and anticipation, and they did get that at first. But the harsh realities of living in a jungle quickly set in. First, the remote location presented obvious logistical challenges. They weren't in the city anymore, they were literally in the jungle. So food and basic necessities were scarce, and the infrastructure was not adequate to support a growing population. Jim's followers also had to work, and I mean work. We're talking night and day in the blistering sun to farm crops, to cook, to clean, and all of this was designed to make the community very self-sufficient. But it ended up being a lie, because there was constant food shortages, and now malnutrition and sickness became a persistent issue. So this idea of a utopia, a paradise, went from being a reality to a far-fetched dream. And Jim, he didn't care. Instead of addressing all these concerns, he tightened his grip on his followers. And he started to install these loudspeakers throughout the compound to broadcast his sermons and directives at all hours of the day and at night, which meant that his followers had very little opportunity to rest. He also convinced his followers that they were under constant threat from external enemies, particularly the US government, which he claimed sought to destroy their sanctuary. But that was not all that Jim did. Like removing a mask, Jim finally revealed his true self when he started implementing severe punishment for anyone who disobeyed him. He would humiliate his followers in front of everyone, he would order for them to be beaten up, and he would segregate families, even stopping them from communicating with their families back home in America. For his followers, they were now completely isolated from the world, and for Jim, he finally had the control that he always wanted. By the mid-1970s, rumours started to circulate about this secret village. The Guyanese people who lived in the surrounding area made constant comments about heavy weaponry and these armed guards who were seen patrolling the outside of the compound. And back home, family members of Jim's followers started reporting that they stopped receiving letters from their loved ones, or they received highly suspicious letters saying that their loved ones never wanted to see their family again and that they wanted to be left alone. Meanwhile, former members of the People's Temple started to speak out about what Jim was really like behind closed doors and what he was actually capable of. After years of these rumours, this finally came to the attention of the US government, and more specifically, one prominent person who was a US congressman called Leo Ryan. Now, Leo wasn't just a stereotypical politician. He wasn't someone who just talked the talk. He was someone who actually took action. For example, when he was chairman of the Assembly Committee that oversaw prison reform, he went undercover using a pseudonym and had himself arrested, detained, and strip searched so he could investigate and see what prisons were really like in California. So he was someone who had a very hands-on investigative approach, and he was known throughout the country for that. So when his office started getting these reports about Jonestown, he was very interested. But unfortunately, it wasn't just a political duty he had, it was also a personal one. And that is because he was very close friends with the father of a People's Temple follower. This follower was named Bob Houston, and in October 1976, his body was found mutilated shortly after he had discussed leaving the temple. So with that, Leo Ryan decided to take matters into his own hands. In November 1978, Leo, accompanied by journalists and concerned relatives, embarked on a journey to Guyana. And when they arrived, they were met with smiles and laughter and excitement, but that facade very quickly changed. As the delegation moved around the settlement and started talking with these followers went from being all happy and smiling to acting very strangely. They started shuffling their feet and they were very antsy, and they kept constantly looking around, almost like they didn't want to be caught. And finally, when Leo went inside one of the cabins because one of the followers wanted to show him the new building that they proudly made, that person then handed Leo a small piece of paper and then went back to talking about his cabin again. Leo didn't know what to think, but he realized that maybe it wasn't the best idea opening up this piece of paper in front of everyone. So he turned away from the group and he bent down like he was tying his shoelaces. And making sure that no one was looking, he slowly opened that piece of paper, and as he did, he immediately felt the blood draining from his face. Because inside that letter were the words, "They will never let you leave." While this was not the first time Leo had put himself into danger, at least during those times he was in the United States, and the fact remained he was a congressman. He had a ton of power. However, here in Guyana, he was in a foreign country, in the middle of the jungle, and even though he was on an official US government visit, he did not bring security. Because whilst Leo knew that something strange was going on in Jonestown, he had never thought to believe that he would ever be in danger. But now he knew that he was so wrong. Jumping into several cars, the delegation, now accompanied by several temple members, departed from Jonestown. Initially, there was this sense of relief. They were able to leave the compound without any hassle, and now they were minutes away from arriving at the airstrip. And at 4:30 p.m, they did. But once they got there, their hearts sank, because the runway, it was completely empty. Fear started to creep in. They looked around anxiously, first staring at each other, and then just staring at the sky, hoping for a miracle. And then they saw it. 2 planes were gliding in. They could finally leave. And as they scrambled onto the plane, they realized that they were finally safe. They were going to get out of Jonestown. They were going to go back to the United States. But they were so wrong. Just as the planes were ready to take off, a tractor pulling a trailer approached, carrying members of the temple's security force. And without any warning whatsoever, several men got out and started opening fire with their rifles. And these bullets, they pierced right into the plane, instantly killing several people, including US Congressman Leo Ryan. And almost like they were in a trance, the temple security force then continued to meticulously go around and murder every survivor that they could find. Now you might think this is the end of the story, but this isn't even the worst part. Back in Jonestown, terror was filling the minds and hearts of every temple member. The news of Leo Ryan's murder was broadcast immediately over the loudspeakers, and this was intentional. This was the final piece of the puzzle for Jim. He wanted to create fear so he could finally mirror the 2 things he spoke of as a child: religion and death. His mouth to the microphone, his voice echoed over the loudspeakers, and he said calmly, "They are coming. There is no escape. They will torture your children. Death is the only way." As families huddled together, their faces showed a mixture of confusion and dread. Mothers held their babies close, tears streaming down their faces as they whispered prayers. Fathers, they clenched their fists, torn between defiance and the overwhelming reality that escape was not possible. And all while this was happening, they were surrounded by armed guards with their rifles drawn. As Jim Jones gave the order, cups filled with a purple liquid were passed around, and slowly, almost like time was standing still, everyone, men, women, and children, drank. And then they fell. This wasn't just any drink. It was Kool-Aid mixed with cyanide. What just took place wasn't a toast. It was a mass suicide of over 900 people. As Jim Jones looked at the slumped bodies, and as the last victim took their final breath, he took out a revolver. And 1 second later, he too met his death. The aftermath of Jonestown was and will always be one of the darkest points in history. What is now accepted as a cult, Jim Jones People's Temple, was conceived as an avenue to fight against oppression and inequality, but very quickly became the opposite. To this day, we still don't know whether Jim Jones actually believed in what he preached or whether it was all an act. But like all cult leaders, we do know that Jim Jones was a master manipulator who took advantage of the lost and desperate. And this cost the lives of over 900 people, including innocent children. Now, of course, many can argue that the followers had a choice and that they were also to blame for their decisions. I would love to know what you think in the comments below. Also, at the start of the video, I mentioned a popular saying that we often use today, which actually originated from the events at Jonestown. Do you recall the purple drink that Jim Jones prepared? Well, nowadays, we use the phrase, "don't drink the Kool-Aid," to describe the dangers of blindly following ideologies and viewpoints. So I hope you enjoyed today's story, and if you haven't already done so, please press like and the subscribe button and turn on all notifications on so you can be part of the exclusive club that gets to see my videos as soon as they are uploaded. So thank you so much for your time today, and I will see you on the next video.